It was well past midnight when people living in houses outside the Union Carbide pesticide plant first started to get the smell. Many accounts describe the smell as similar to that of burning chilies. At first, then it got worse. Mothers watched as their babies choked to death. People ran out onto the streets, vomiting in a daze. Bodies frothing at the mouth piled up on the roads. Within weeks, 8,000 people died. The death count went up to 15,000 in the months ahead. Around 5 lakh people stood exposed to the deadly methyl isocyanate. These lakhs and a generation to come would bear the burden of crippling medical bills. It was the world's worst ever industrial disaster. The tragedy would also come to be known as the Bhopal betrayal. Here's why. In the years leading up to the tragedy, there were at least 2, although smaller, leaks at the plant. The CBI, which investigated the case, said none of the plant's safety systems were operational. The methyl isocyanate tank's refrigeration system was switched off as a cost-cutting measure. The CBI said criminally negligent operational practices resulted in the leakage of methyl isocyanate, and these were in the knowledge of the management and were deliberately ignored for commercial reasons. The tragedy would soon turn into a farce. Warren Anderson, the CEO of Union Carbide, reaches Bhopal and is arrested at the airport. He is taken to a posh guest house of the Union Carbide company and is placed under house arrest. Anderson, who evidently worked the phones at the guest house to get the US administration to pressure New Delhi, secures bail the same day. He is escorted to the airport, reportedly by the superintendent of police. An official recalls a Super King Airby 200 was already kept waiting for him. Arjun Singh, then Chief Minister of Madhya Pradesh, would, decades later, look to pass the buck on to then Union Home Minister P.V. Narasimha Rao. Warren Anderson never returned to face trial and lived the good life in the Hamptons till his death in 2014. In February 1985, the Indian government filed claims for $3.3 billion from Union Carbide in a US court. The next year, the US court transferred all Bhopal litigation to India. In December 1987, the CBI filed its charge sheet against Anderson and other accused under sections of culpable homicide. 2 years later, the Indian government and Union Carbide struck an out-of-court settlement for $470 million that came to a paltry $500 per victim. When asked about that pitiful sum, Kathy Hunt, spokesperson for Dow Chemicals that bought Union Carbide, said $500 is plenty good for an Indian. Yes, you heard that right. And in case you're wondering, Dow Chemicals is number 62 on the Fortune 500 list and earns billions of dollars in profits every year. Dow, incidentally, always maintained it did not inherit Union Carbide's liabilities. But
if you look at very, very similar damage in the sense of, like, there was asbestos poisoning in the United States caused by a subsidiary of Union Carbide, the Union Carbide Corporation, the New York entity, and prior to the takeover of the New York entity by Dow Chemicals, right? So in terms of corporate structures, it was identical to the violations in Bhopal, right? However, those claims were disclosed to the Securities and Exchange Commission as a charge on Dow Chemicals as as a sort of liability that they claim, right? So here you have a third world victim and you have a first world victim, and the first world victim's life is blatantly more valuable here, in a way that it's such a deep shame.
not helping matters was what was evidently the corporate governmental nexus at work.
The government also failed to deal with the commercial aspects, the commercial law aspects of the veil piercing between the various corporate entities in order to find liability for Dow Chemicals and Union Carbide. And then, we saw that in court, there were times that the counsel for Dow Chemicals and Union Carbide, they get the most fancy fat cat counsels, right? were then saying that, oh, my friend, the AG, and I should sort it out, and trying to shut out the victims. So there are many layers of this corporate governmental nexus, and it's very, very hard to break.
The initial settlement between the Indian government and Union Carbide included quashing criminal charges against the officials responsible for the leak. The charges were later reinstated. In September 1996, the court reduced the charges against the accused from Section 304 Part 2, which is culpable homicide, to Section 304A, which is causing death by rash or negligent act. Or, in the words of one of the lawyers for the Bhopal gas victims,
it's in the nature of a traffic accident. We had a traffic accident in Bhopal. As far as the law is concerned, as far as the people are concerned, you have second and third generations of victims who are unable to walk, have terrible health, have genetic mutations.
26 years after the case was filed, 8 people were held guilty of that negligence and sentenced to 2 years in prison. Anderson, of course, was never extradited. Just a week after that judgment, American hypocrisy was on display, with then-President Barack Obama reacting to the Gulf oil spill, talked tough, saying,
BP is responsible for this leak. BP will be paying the bill.
A total of 11 people died in that disaster. In the wake of the Bhopal verdict, then-Union Law Minister Veerappa Moily said there was an urgent need to codify the law of torts to ensure that corporations don't get away with mass murder. The lack of codified tort law, most experts agree, has severely been felt. Tort law is based on the premise that an individual who causes harm must compensate for that harm. Now, experts argue that one of the reasons Union Carbide set up operations in India is because there wasn't any system to ensure corporate accountability. Class action suits, a powerful tool to ensure corporate ethics, is non-existent in India. Corporates understand the language of money, so whatever they do has to be financially viable for them. So for a Union Carbide to have ensured that safety mechanisms are in place and working, they would have to know that the price for not doing so would far outweigh the costs. Net-net, a well-codified tort law would ensure ethical corporate behavior. As for the question, are we better prepared today for a Bhopal-like disaster?
So the answer is absolutely no, we are not equipped. You take a situation where you had a nuclear disaster, and it is conceivable that the fallout of the nuclear disaster would look like, and the penalty for such a fallout would be like a traffic accident.